Welcome to the Propertybuyer Podcast, where we explore the world of residential and commercial real estate to help you make better decisions about buying, selling, or investing in all types of property. Join me, Rich Harvey, CEO of propertybuyer.com.au and multi-award winning buyer's advocate. Our podcast features expert interviews, market trends and insights, and practical tips for navigating the complex world of Australian real estate. Whether you're a home buyer, a seasoned property investor, commercial buyer, developer, or simply curious about the property market, our podcast is for you. Join us as we share our knowledge, strategies and experience and help you achieve your property goals. Well, welcome to another edition of the Propertybuyer Podcast. In this episode, we're starting a new theme of interviewing real estate industry legends, leaders who've been in the game for many years and have trailblazed a new path or even left a legacy for others to build on. Now, we know the real estate market is made up of many sectors, including sales agents, property managers, auctioneers, strata managers, buyers agents, commercial agents, and many more. Understanding how this industry works and how you as the buyer or the seller interact with these key industry players can make a huge difference to both your experience in buying and selling and the outcome of your personal goals. Well, today, folks, we're very fortunate to have an industry legend in the studio with me, Leanne Pilkington, who's going to share her decades of knowledge and wisdom with us today. Now, Leanne Pilkington is the Chief Executive Officer of Laing and Simmons Corporation. She's also the current Real Estate Institute of Australia President and the former President of the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. We're going to be looking at how we can break down gender barriers, how we can create empathy, and look at strategies for empowering your own property journey. Leanne, wonderful to have you in the studio today with us.
Oh, thanks so much for the opportunity. It's always great to catch up.
Fantastic. Leanne, we have a little tradition with our podcast here at Property Buyer where we start with a thought of the week. So I'm going to throw you a quote from a guy called Booker T. Washington. And he says that few things can help an individual more than to place responsibility on them and to let them know that you trust them. What do you take from that quote?
Well, I think everybody wants to feel like they are trusted, whether it's by their team, their family, their clients. And I think that if you feel that somebody genuinely has given you their trust, you don't want to let them down. So you do take responsibility for living up to those expectations.
It's good, isn't it? I mean, yeah. I have the theory of parenting called enough rope, where you give your kids right enough trust, but not so much they hang themselves. You know?
Yeah, so, absolutely.
And the same in business. I mean, you've managed a lot of staff, right? And I think the more responsibility, the more they step up. I really find that's great. A great quote. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I do my very best to empower my people to explore new ideas and push themselves outside of what they know they're already capable of. And yes, sometimes it can be a massive fail, but we have a saying in our corporate team, let's get curious about how we could have done that differently. So they know, the whole team know that I'm not going to lose my temper when something goes wrong. I am going to ask them to take responsibility and to just get curious about what went wrong, why it went wrong, and how we could do it differently.
I love that. Actually, one of my favourite episodes of Ted Lasso is a scene there about asking curious questions, but we'll get to that another day.
Yeah, I love Ted Lasso.
Great corporate lessons there. But look, Leanne, let's start from the start. I want to get a little bit of your backstory, if I may. How long have you been working in real estate? And I guess, what was your first job?
Gosh, what a question. I actually started working for my dad as a 12-year-old, answering the phone in his office.
Age 12?
Yeah, on a Saturday. I'm nearly 62, so that's 50 years.
Wow.
Full-time, I started in 1981. Yeah, and again, working for Dad.
Yeah, fantastic. And your dad ran a selling agency, was it?
He sure did, yeah. Dad had three independent offices in the Hills District.
Nice.
For a very long time, and then he eventually went over to Ray White in the late 80s.
Okay, fantastic. And I guess what sort of attracted you to get into the property industry in the first place?
Well, you've clearly not met my dad because he didn't really give me any choice. It was one of those things.
Thou shalt work in the industry like me.
Thou shalt work, and thou shalt work hard.
Right.
So yeah, I didn't have a day. I did not have a Sunday off.
Okay.
From the age of 12 till the age of about 27 when I stopped working for Dad.
Yeah. Wow. Well, that beautiful work ethic is certainly carried through, and it's definitely a legacy you've left in the industry. It's wonderful.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Now, you've taken on, as well as working your way up through the ranks to become CEO, you've also then taken on some, contribution roles, as I would call it.
Sure.
And this current role you've got of REIA, Real Estate Institute of Australia President, and you were previously the Real Estate Institute of New South Wales. What motivated you to take on those roles?
Well, right back at the very beginning, I was motivated to come onto the New South Wales board, which I think was 2009, so it was a long time ago. As a franchisor, I often have people, or I always have people knocking on the door saying, I want to open a real estate business. And my first response is, fantastic, talk to me about your real estate experience. And there was a time when you only had to do a 6-week course to get your real estate license. So you didn't have to have any experience at all in the industry. And that just, after working so hard, took me 3 years to get my real estate license and a couple of years of experience. So it infuriated me that that had been really diluted. So I knew the REI in New South Wales was working towards improving the educational requirements. And so that's what really encouraged me to join the board.
Good on you.
And I also, real estate, the industry has been very good to me. I think there's some incredible people. Some of my favourite people in the world are real estate agents. And I just felt if the industry has given me so much, it's then my responsibility to give back to the industry when you're in a position to do so.
Yeah, that's fantastic. No, that's really great. I want to sort of talk about, I guess, the gender balance, and a question for you is, how do you think the real estate industry generally has treated women? And I mean, I'm talking also two things here. One about women as buyers and also women real estate agents. So maybe you could sort of address those two questions, if you may.
Sure. So let's go to buyers first. Typically, it is the women who make the decisions. It may not be overtly. Some of them may defer to their husbands, and some of the husbands actually think they're making the decisions when in fact they're actually not.
Little do they know.
Yeah, that's exactly right. So I think I think most agents realise that that's the case these days. But certainly back in the old days, I was selling real estate in the Hills District in the 80s, and certainly at that time, most people were deferring to the male opinion. So I think we've improved a lot. As far as female agents go, kind of depends on the area where you work. There's some incredible female agents around, particularly in the inner west and the eastern suburbs.
Do you think back in the 80s, though, it was a more, is it true to say it's a more male-dominated industry? Has it changed? I mean, I can't really recall,
Yeah, absolutely. There was only myself, and my mum was a real estate agent as well. So it was only myself and mum were the only females in the Hills District back in those days.
Trailblazer.
Yes, indeed. And even now, a lot of the western suburbs, there's not that many women in comparison. And I think it's a shame, because I think women they approach the sales process very differently to men.
Absolutely, yeah.
They're more empathetic.
Yep.
They're more about building relationships, whereas men typically, and I'm generalising, of course, but men are typically more transactional.
So what is it about how a woman approaches the real estate transaction? I mean, obviously, you say women are more empathetic, but give me an example of that. How do they approach that? How do they bring that empathy to the transaction?
Well, I think they're genuinely interested in the family that are going, or the person that's going to buy the property. I think they tend to ask questions to understand, rather than asking questions just to then have an opportunity to respond with whatever sales pitch. So
that's a really good point. I mean, as a buyer's agent, I've done thousands of open homes, and I meet lots of different agents, and of all various qualities and genders. And I find that some agents are like robots that have got a little clipboard, or today they've got their mobile phone, and saying, "What's your name? Where's your mobile number?" And even the tone of their voice when they ask that is important. And whereas
Really
some
is.
great female agents will, as you say, ask great questions. They go off script. I mean, everyone's been given a script if they've been trained well.
Sure.
But often, I find women are really good at getting that deeper level of, how many other properties have you seen today? And how long have you been in the area? Do you know the schools in the area? Like asking a lot better questions, I think brings that rapport and empathy, in my view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I just think that some people are much more naturally curious than others. And we always have to remember that just because we are doing, 5 or 10 open homes over a weekend, and it gets very repetitive because we're doing it week in, week out, some people are buying only for the first or second time in their whole lives. So we have to be mindful of that and get off the scripts and dialogues and the rotation. You have to genuinely try and connect and understand the needs of the person in front of you.
Oh, fantastic. So what do you think the gender balance is now in the real estate industry between male and female agents? Have you got any ideas on the rough percentage?
Yeah, so if you actually look at the split across the industry in general, it's round about 50-50. There's a slight increase. There's a slightly more women than men, but that is because there are more women in property management and admin and support roles. So we can't get any clear info on the actual gender split of agents, but it's nowhere near 50-50.
That's great. Fantastic. And by the way, I know some fantastic male property managers too. In fact, I've got some that manage my properties and they're brilliant, so I think there's a lot more crossover. And I think also that there's perhaps not that same level of bias or perception that a particular part of the industry is superior or inferior. I mean, a lot of people think, oh, you're the lowly property manager. I think property managers have the hardest job in the world.
Totally.
And they should be absolutely acknowledged. I mean, I often send off an email to my property manager, thanks so much, well done. And they don't get any encouragement in the day.
No, they don't. And it's thankfully now I think people are seeing that property management is a genuine career option. It's not just a job. And every business needs to have a strong property management department. It's a critical part of a successful business.
Yeah. During the opening, we talked a little bit about trust, and I just want to ask you about, what the general public's perception is of real estate agents. I mean, most people have a warped, previous distrust of agents. Yeah. How do you think the sales agent approaches their job and can rebuild the trust and those poor biases that still exist out there?
I think that the perception of agents is a really interesting conversation, and I would love to be able to drill down into those numbers where it says that, the majority of people think real estate agents are unethical. I think that if you speak to homeowners that have sold their property, by and large, most of them are very happy with the agent that they chose because they went through a lot of detailed research and interviews to find the right person for them. I think quite often the challenge is with buyers who don't necessarily understand the obligations on a selling agent. I think that.
And just touch on those obligations. Tell me why you think the buyers probably get annoyed or cheesed off that they think they're being unethical, where in fact you might say they're just doing their job. Let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, the job of a selling agent is to achieve the highest price for the homeowner. That's what we're paid to do. That's what we're required to do. It can get difficult for buyers that don't necessarily understand those obligations. But we also have to be really careful. There are some parts of Sydney where underquoting is a real issue.
We'll come to that in a minute. But
right. And that undermines the trust
Mm.
across the industry, which is really disappointing.
Yeah, I think I've found that agents that are very transparent in the process are the best agents. They say, totally. I've received an offer of X. They often tell you what the offer is. You'll need to be above that if you want to be able to buy this property. And the vendor's expectation is Y, and you actually got a picture. Whereas the cagey agent says, oh, we've had an offer. I can't reveal it, but you'll need to be higher than that. And just a way, just too vague. and then they're vague or bad communicators, that's what builds distrust. If they're poor communicators, like as a buyer's agent, we're on the opposite end of the spectrum. We're trying to secure the property at the lowest price, but we know there's going to be competition for that property. So we have to understand we're not just competing against the agent in a way, we're competing against the owner and other buyers. So, as buyer's agents, we have to really read the play across all those areas. But I think a lot of people have that distrust or perceived thought that agents are dodgy because they're just doing their job and they're just trying to create competition. They don't understand that that's a legal obligation on the behalf of the agent. Right?
Absolutely agree. But I completely agree also that transparent communication is what we all need. It's not just in the buying and selling transaction. It's in life. It's in business. Absolutely. It's in everything we do. It's so important to have consistent, clear, transparent communication.
Well, let me ask you the question about underquoting. I mean, often underquoting is it's been outlawed, obviously, but it's often mentioned in the media as a continuing problem. Are you seeing any evidence of there and amongst your colleagues? Is it still occurring? What's happening out there?
Yeah, it's absolutely still occurring. And fair trading are trying to do what they can about it. It's not that easy with the resources they have in fair trading to accurately and effectively deal with it. But, part of the challenge is that underquoting works. And when I say it works, it does get more people to come to the property. And when you have more people, you then have more chance of selling it under competition. And that's the problem.
The biggest problem I see, Leanne, is that the underquoting, when it's just major underquoting. I mean, I'll give you an example. We saw a property advertised, price guide 2.3 in Alexandria. Just way underquoted. The owner was expecting 2.8 to 3 million.
Yeah, that's
and then the thing is, then the buyers think, I might get it for 2.5, and then you get 4 or 5 people doing pest and building inspections. Get to auction day, first bid's 2.8, blows everyone out of the water, sells for 3. And and the agent says, on the agency agreement, it's just wrong. And it's just terrible that it's that far, 30% out.
And the only way we're going to stop it is for the fair trading to get really serious about it and fine and name and shame the people that consistently do it. We've had a situation not far from where I live. The property was up for auction. The owners wanted 1.6. There was a prior to auction an offer of 1.5. The owners knocked it back. And then it's been listed by another agent quoting 1.2. Now, there was an offer in writing of 1.5. We know the owner wants 1.6. It's like, what is going on?
Just be open about it,
It's so infuriating.
I mean, if I'm the agent, I'd be get sick of all the calls saying I can, just make your life easier for yourself, So So. Do you think the fines are high enough?
No, I don't. No, I don't.
What's the number? What's the fine if you
want? It depends. It's a unit price, so it's it can run in the thousands of dollars. But some of the agents out there that are routinely underquoting are earning a serious amount of money, and they look at some of these fines as just a cost of doing business.
Do you know what I heard from a friend the other day? They were talking about speeding fines in Sweden. And apparently, if you speed in Sweden, depending on the level of speed you go over, it's also correlated with how much you earn. And so if you are like 15 kilometres over the limit and you earn, $1 million a year, your fine could be quite significant. So imagine if they had the same system here in Australia. If we linked underquoting to how much a real estate agent earns, there's a novel approach for fining people. What do you think?
Yeah, that's for sure. That's a really novel approach.
Like
I'd love to see. Oh yeah. I do. I like it a lot. But so unfortunately, sometimes the homeowners are complicit in the underquoting.
Yes.
So the agents will say, look, and this is verbal, they don't necessarily put it in writing, but they'll say, look, your property's probably worth 1.5 to 1.6, but we, to get the most people through, we need to show it at 1.2 to 1.3.
Yeah.
And so that's the information they're giving their owners, and the owners want to get the most money, and so they believe that the agent's strategy is the right one.
And then they'll sign off on that agency agreement to protect themselves. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
So it's very complicated.
Yeah. Okay.
Really complicated.
There you go. So just quickly back to, I guess, just the gender balance, if I may. Just
Sure.
what support or, I guess, policy initiatives have you seen help to bring more empowerment to women in the real estate industry? Is there any kind of things that are being done to bring more strength?
Oh, look, just, from just a purely a Laing and Simmons perspective, I can tell you we've got a WhatsApp group with some of our senior
Fantastic.
female agents and some of the newer agents, and the sharing that goes on in that group with the girls it's really lovely. They just get the support they need. They don't feel intimidated to ask the question like they might in a bigger group. So it's just those little things that can really make a difference.
That's
and
great.
We've also got some business owners that are encouraging single mums to come back to work. So you've got to have that flexibility for, it's not just women, it's anybody who's a single parent in particular needs to have a bit of flexibility so that they can look after the needs of their family as well as work.
Fantastic. And you've been involved with things like RISE, and is there any other kind of groups, or just tell us a little bit about that?
So RISE is a group focused on the well-being, in particular the mental well-being across the real estate industry. It is a very stressful business. You're dealing with people's biggest asset. And you're also dealing with people who are at their most stressed, because people who are buying and selling property don't always do it for happy reasons.
Yep.
And even when they are happy reasons, it's still a big financial transaction and you have to make sure you get it right. So it doesn't, high levels of stress doesn't bring out the best in anybody. So that can make it hard for the agents. I'm also involved in a group called Real Women in Real Estate. So we're a networking group for women. And it's just, it's not so bad now, but when I started that group in 2015, you would go to conferences, for example, and all the people on stage were blokes. And the way they approach things and their stories don't necessarily resonate with women.
Yep.
So it's just important to have that diversity.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think in any business or any industry that mental health is something that needs to be looked at. You look at first responders or people in the police force, and they get to witness the worst of the worst. And imagine going home from work and, my neighbour used to be a policeman and he had to pick some teenager up off the tracks one day that had died.
Oh, really?
And imagine how that affected him,
Awful.
But I think it's really important. You make a good point about having those sharing groups. We do the same in our team. We share our wins and we share our losses. And I ask the team a question. Guys, tell us what went well and tell us what didn't go so well this week. And how can we do it better with our clients? It's always a matter of, and I think we learn so much more from our failures than we do from our successes. And if you're willing to be vulnerable and share that with your team, I think that's a really good strategy.
It is. Yeah, we do it. That's Friday mornings for us.
Good on you.
And you've got to have that psychological safety within your team that people aren't going to use your challenges to, have a crack.
Yeah, that's good.
So it's very, very important. We've also got an employee assistance program. So basically a counsellor available for all of our Laing and Simmons team members and their families. And we put that in place. We've probably had that for about 10 years or so now. And I wasn't sure that it would get used. But it gets used every month.
Excellent.
Sometimes multiple times a month. So I'm grateful that people are actually, reaching out to talk to someone when they need it.
Well, we all need a tune-up. We should be going to the doctors. We get our cars serviced, so we should be getting our head serviced as well. We really appreciate you tuning in to the Property Buyer Podcast, and I hope that you're finding our expert interviews helpful. So that we can keep providing this information and growing our audience, we rely on word-of-mouth recommendations. If you found this information useful, could I please ask you to share this podcast with your friends, family and colleagues, and ask them to subscribe to the Property Buyer Podcast. It would be a big help and we'd be very grateful for your support. Thanks once again for sharing the links. And now let's get back to the podcast. Leanne, you mentioned that some people sell their homes for not happy reasons. I just want to touch on divorce, death and separation just briefly.
Yep.
But divorce and separation, it's been a major reason for a lot of people, selling their properties and obviously an agent getting a listing. But how do you think women sellers / buyers could be better protected in getting a fairer outcome in these situations?
Gosh, that's a great question, isn't it?
Mm.
And I think that we've got to protect ourselves on the way into these relationships and transactions.
Mm.
And nobody really wants to think about it at the beginning of a relationship because that's all happy.
Mm.
But you do need to make sure that you get your own advice, and you don't just blindly sign paperwork that you're given. And I know there are plenty of women that actually do.
Yeah. I mean, we've helped a lot of divorced women over the years in my business as buyers agents, and even my neighbour. As I mentioned, the guy next door, he was a policeman. He died several years ago, but she had no idea on the finances. It was a traditional marriage. The husband had done all the money stuff, and she had a couple of sons, but they were just too busy. So I basically helped her, with the whole selling
Untangle
process
it all.
and untangle it, and then I helped her buy her next place as well. And she just couldn't have done it. She would have been like a lamb to the slaughter. She would have been absolutely taken advantage of. And I just think, particularly if you're going through divorce and separation, there's major emotional upheaval. You're not good at making decisions typically, and you can make a terrible decision in those situations. Sure. So my advice to anyone listening today is that don't be afraid to reach out for help. Get professional help. And make sure you use someone who's trustworthy. You're not going to take advantage of you. But also, when you do find someone trustworthy, don't second guess them every second step of the way.
Yeah.
And it's
hard to find that balance, right? How can I really trust them? But I think that we really all have to educate ourselves along the way. So don't wait until everything's gone wrong. Even it might be that you've got wealth in shares, for example, or in property, but your husband's taking care of all of it. Just ask him to start helping you understand.
That's it.
And most partners are really happy to do that. And if they're not, quite frankly, I'd say that's a flag.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah, you've got to trust each other. Absolutely.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I want to just turn briefly now to, I guess, the regulation in the industry, particularly around sales agents at the moment. But do you think there's adequate or inadequate overall regulation of the industry for selling agents?
Look, I think that it's over-regulated in a lot of ways, and they keep adding to the regulation, and they keep I really wish that the regulators would actually either take more notice of the people at the coalface on the ground, or spend some time in an agency to understand how the process works, so we can more effectively integrate the regulation. So, for example, sales agents are required to make a note of any time they talk about price over the phone to a buyer. They're not required to take the name and phone number of the buyer and the price conversation, just the price conversation. But if you and I both know what it's like to be to be an agent out there in the field, and they're on the road all the time. So just the nature of trying to record that information is complicated.
You press the button on your phone, right? You can't text while you're driving, but you press the button to answer a phone call from a buyer.
Yep.
Hey, it's Sally Bloggs here. I'm looking to make an offer. I want to make an offer of 1.2 million on Smith Street. How do you record that? You have to remember, and then you get another 3 phone calls, right? It's just,
It's just not, it's not workable. And it's not that we don't want to comply. It's not that we don't want things to be more transparent for everybody. It's just that some of the things that are asked of us are not practical.
That's it. Yeah. I really like your idea of getting at the coalface, I think there's been some ministers that have been pretty proactive and actually getting out there. I've just forgotten his name, the previous guy in the Liberal government. What was his name? The Technology Innovation Minister. The guy from Ryde, I forget his name. But anyway, he was out there trying to reform. But I think you're right. I think there is a bit too much over-regulation. And, but just talking about reform, where do you think reform in the industry? I'm not just talking New South Wales. If you were a minister in the government, what would you change if you had the power?
Wow, that's a big question.
Put you on the spot. Come on.
Yeah, really have.
Well, I know it's on you're the real estate president, so I'm sure you've got some agenda items you want to plug. So.
Yeah, well, we're at the moment we're working with the Attorney General's office on the anti-money laundering requirements. Now, we're absolutely supportive of playing our part in stamping that out, but we also have to learn from what's happened with our New Zealand friends, because even a small business was spending $30,000 a year on compliance. Now, most real estate businesses are very, very small, and that's their margin in some cases. So, and we also need to, because bankers and lawyers are also caught under this legislation. So we don't want to be sending the same information through 3 times. So how can we all work together to make sure that it's seamless? But what does tend to happen is that the regulators are, often lawyers, politicians they've never worked in small business, a lot of them. And so there's just a lack of genuine understanding. And that's the bit that really frustrates me. I want them to really understand our business more effectively, and then the legislation would work better for everybody.
How do you think you can bridge that gap between educating a minister or educating a regulator and showing them the actual practicality of what's written in an act or a regulation? Because it used to frustrate the hell out of me. I was in government for 10 years. When I was a very young, in my 20s, I worked as an economist, and I would analyse government regulations, and the way that's written, it's just so complicated.
So complicated.
How do we bridge that? Back to the question: how do we bridge that gap to have more effective and relevant reforms?
I wish there was an easy answer. Certainly here in New South Wales, they have tried to do that by getting people with more industry experience involved in, think tanks and panels and all of that sort of stuff. But it sounds great in theory, but I haven't seen it effectively positively impacting the legislation that's coming out. Our supervision guidelines, for example, have just been updated, and I was told that they were being updated to simplify it. Well, I've spoken to plenty of people, including my own team, and they've said simplify. I don't think so.
The opposite.
They've just made it more complicated.
It's almost like, how they have that TV show called Undercover Boss, right? And the boss has to put on their cap for a day. I think we need to do that.
How good would that be?
Just hear what I'm trying to say here, Leanne. Like, it's ridiculous. Like, the problem is they have these so-called stakeholder meetings, right?
Yep.
And you get everyone in a room, and it's all artificial, and everyone has their folders, and you have a big talk fest, right? There is nothing beats getting in a car, visiting an agency, and spending a whole week of time looking at how a transaction unfolds. Then I think a minister might actually get with the program.
Absolutely.
That's my view. There you go.
I completely agree. We need to get them out into the field. And also, all of the changes to tenancy laws that we've seen, that's doing is driving investors out of the market. I genuinely feel for people that are struggling to find a place to live. However, not all tenants are good tenants. And I think there are people in government, and particularly in tenants unions and those sorts of places, that would be horrified if they saw some of the behaviour and the damage and the aggression that some of our property managers have to deal with on a daily basis.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're true, right. All right. I want to ask you another topic, buyer's agents. I'm one of them, but it's been a growing industry, a growing force. What's your perspective on the role of the buyer's agent in the typical real estate transaction?
Look, I think, homeowners pay to be represented by a real estate agent, and I think it makes sense for buyers to also be represented in the transaction. Buyers are not professional negotiators, real estate agents are. So they need to have someone on their side. So I'm a very big fan of buyer's agents. The only thing I would say is that they are popping up all over the place, and some of them are not potentially as qualified as I would like to see.
Interesting. Now, how do you think the buyer's agent industry will evolve if you're seeing like lots of individual operators pop up left, right and centre that aren't qualified as well as they should be? How do you think this industry is going to evolve in the future?
Well, you tell me. You're the expert in that space, aren't you?
Yeah. Well, it's an interesting one. I think it's going to be, like you say, there's a lot of people that have, doing a 1 week or a 1 month marketing program and think
Yeah.
they're a great buyer's agents. But, the thing, there's one thing to get a piece of paper, even to get your real estate license. It's completely another to know how to deliver that service. So anyone
Sure.
can hang up a shingle and do a fancy website and saying,
Yep.
we're the leading buyer's agents in blah, blah suburb. But to actually prove and show how to do research, to understand how to do adequate due diligence, to know how to negotiate with finesse, to know how to manage your client's expectations and read the market. There's so many moving parts to helping the buyer that it's really important that buyers pick the right buyer's agent, not just a personality fit, but a credibility fit, a professional fit. So I guess the answer to the question is, look, I think it will evolve. I think I'm seeing a much larger percentage of people using buyer's agents. I keep getting rang up by journalists all the time saying, do you know what percentage? And I don't. There's no actual data
there's no
on
number.
it. I think it used to be like 2 or 3%, but I'd say it's probably at least 10, maybe even 20% in certain markets.
In certain markets,
I mean, I think in the eastern suburbs, it's probably you need to have a buyer's agent, or the North Shore, if you want to actually own a property, because I can tell you, Leanne, you know what happens, right? We get access to every property before it goes on the market. We get access, it hits our inbox before it hits anyone else's inbox.
That's exactly right. That whole, off market, that's a whole different conversation. The concept of an off market property being promoted on the internet just still drives me nuts, because obviously it's on the market. But buyer's agents genuinely do get pre-market and off market opportunities. They absolutely do. So you're right. You need, in some markets, you definitely need to be using a buyer's agent. Otherwise, it's going to be a real struggle.
We love just jumping around. We're talking about a lot of things today. This is great. I want to throw another one at you, and that's prop tech and AI. Particularly, it's seen that AI is like the way of the future. It's transforming many industries, including the real estate industry, and we're adopting it significantly in our business. But I'm curious to understand how you're approaching it. What are you adopting in Laing and Simmons, and how are you keeping up with technology?
Yeah, I actually just spent 2 days earlier this week doing some AI. We've built a whole series of bots. I have a digital twin now.
Oh wow!
So I've been cloned.
Yeah. What are you called? Have you got a nickname?
No, it's just going to be going to be me.
Oh, not Leanne or something.
Not Leanne, no. Leanne's digital twin or something. I don't know.
My team want to create one called Richie. So here we go.
Yeah, it's all hilarious, but it's fascinating stuff. So we're just building information for our internal team. So a property manager can say, I've got this problem with a tenant. What does the legislation say? What are the NCAT rulings? So that they can be more prepared to do the right thing. So there's all of that. We've got sales coaches. So we've got how world-class open. I'm going to my first open home. What are the things I need to do? And so it will just walk you through everything that you need. So it's very, very exciting. We haven't launched it to the network yet. We're still building it out, but we'll be launching it very soon.
That's great. Yeah, fantastic. We're using AI in our business, particularly around a lot of things. It's around marketing, firstly, in qualifying leads and just helping to attract the right kind of person, help the right kind of buyer. Secondly, we're using extensively with research and shortlisting. It's just a huge time saver. You can never replace a human being though in the transaction. And that's the thing I think the audience needs to understand, that AI is a facilitator. It's not the decision maker at the end of the day. Like when we're appraising the value of the property, we don't rely on the automated valuation systems. You can press a button and CoreLogic will give you a number, but it can be out by 10, 20, even 30, even 50% sometimes. I've seen some. So I think the key that we always say to our team is make sure that you always apply a healthy dose of skepticism and reality to anything that AI produces for you.
Absolutely. I mean, there's a couple of things with AI. Firstly, it doesn't always tell the truth. So it can, they call it hallucination.
Yes.
But it makes stuff up. So you've got to be very specific with the way that you question the AI, the prompts that you put in. So that is really important, and it doesn't predict the future. So it only can provide the it's just a really fast way of gathering all of the information that's available on something.
That's good.
So
point.
That's all history, right? It's not future facing.
Typically. So really good point. Really good point. Another question for Leanne. You have quite a few franchises in different parts of New South Wales, but tell us about how you see the mood of the property market right now, and is there any kind of significant factor that's influencing the general property market at the moment?
Yeah, I've never seen prices continue to rise in a high interest rate environment. Usually they'll be going down while interest rates are going up. So we haven't seen that. To my knowledge, we haven't seen it before. I've been in the industry for over 4 decades. So that's interesting. We are low supply, high demand. The government understands that that's a problem, and they've promised to build, so many properties, but they are falling way behind. So it does not look like housing affordability is going to improve anytime soon. As we sit right now, as we're recording this podcast, we're sort of in the last month of winter. Some people are telling me that there's not enough stock around, but they're also telling me that they are seeing a lot of people signing up to put their properties on the market prior to Christmas, so for spring. So, it's a level of uncertainty because we're not sure that we're at the last of the interest rate rises. We're not sure what's going to happen with the global economy. We're in a real state of flux around the world. So that level of uncertainty makes people sit on their hands. But as we said before, people have to sell. People don't always get to choose when they buy and sell property. Sometimes those decisions are forced upon them.
I reckon just my perspective is that I think we're definitely at the end of the interest rate cycle. The next rate rise won't be coming. It's going to be on hold. I think we may be very lucky and see a drop in December, but much more likely definitely in February. Definitely totally agree with your low supply, high demand. And we're seeing that in a lot of markets across, Sydney, Brisbane, to a lesser extent Melbourne, which is a great opportunity to buy counter-cyclical. But we're seeing interest rates is probably the biggest factor that's putting the handbrake on, which is natural, right? But but to your point, there has actually been a couple of times in the last couple of decades where prices have risen while rates have gone up, but typically they've slowed dramatically.
Not like this.
But in this last one, because the biggest X factor has been migration, 650,000 people arriving on our shores in a 12-month period has absolutely spiked demand for both rentals and for buyers. And think about all of those migrants, they're probably renting, the majority, they're going to become buyers. Probably at least 1/3 of them will become buyers in the next couple of years, which is going to put additional pressure. So you talk about those factors washing through the market. Once we get interest rates dropping, 1/4 to 1%, you would just watch the market reignite. So you've heard it here.
I agree with you.
So tell us also, do you have any comments on the top end of the market? So sort of luxury property in the 5 million plus range. Are you seeing any trends in that area?
Well, they don't have to typically worry about getting money, right? So they don't worry about interest rates. They're buying their properties outright. So there's always demand at that top end, and that seems to be more and more demand as people are just getting, a percentage of people are just getting richer. Sadly. So there's a lot of demand. There's a lot of demand from offshore as well. Again, not enough supply and plenty of demand.
Well, I think, particularly we're finding in any harbourside suburb, beachside suburb, or, in a Melbourne, in a Brisbane is definitely in high demand. We're seeing a lot of expats, as you say, have wanting to have a bolt hole to come back home to. So we're getting good inquiry from that sort of market. So I think, the luxury market is more immune to interest rate movements and definitely continued demand. So, Leanne, I've got 2 more questions for you before I let you go. I just want to ask you personally, what's been your best property investment, if you have one, if you're happy to share?
Oh gosh, my best property investment. I'm not very good at buying and selling property, so we live on half an acre at the moment. We're going through the process of subdividing that at the moment. Good so that's obviously we didn't pay. We've been here for a long time, so we've made a lovely profit out of that. But we've also got a couple of properties in super funds that we've added granny flats to.
Excellent.
And so that it's really been effective because for us in our super, our strategy is that high return.
Absolutely.
So that has been fantastic.
Can't agree with that more. I'm a big fan of granny flats. I've got a couple myself, and if you ever listen to my webinars, I'm always plugging granny flats as a great strategy. It's a relatively low, affordable cost. You're actually solving the housing problem for a lot of people too, because you're providing more affordable rentals, and it's a great way.
Absolutely. And you don't have to do it all at once either, right?
Yeah, that's right.
You can buy the property and then add the granny flat.
Yeah, you do it later.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, last question. What's your best property tip that you'd love to share with our audience today? Maybe your buying or selling tip.
I think people are always waiting to buy at the bottom of the market. They want to sell at the top and buy at the bottom. Buy and sell in the same market. It's and the best time to buy a property was 40 or 50 years ago. Second best time to buy is now. Property is going to continue to increase. And just get some really good advice. Go to a mortgage broker. Particularly if you haven't bought before, if you're a first-time buyer, you'd be surprised at what you can do and the tips that you can learn to put yourself in a better position to be able to get your first mortgage. So get some advice from a good mortgage broker.
Fantastic tips. Leanne, you are a font of knowledge. You're a great role model for our industry. I just want to say a huge thank you from our audience today for being on the Property Buyer Podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.
Wonderful. Well, thanks everybody for listening to another edition of the Property Buyer Podcast. We'll be back again in a few weeks with the next edition. Bye for now. Thanks for being with us on another Property Buyer Podcast. If you have a question you'd like to ask, please click on the SpeakPipe link and we'll answer this during the next episode. If you're looking to buy a residential or commercial property in the near future and would like to get the added advantage of having a buyer's advocate on your side, then please reach out to my team today and send us your inquiry, and we'd be delighted to help. Please visit our website at propertybuyer.com.au, where you can stay updated with all my latest market updates, weekly blogs and live suburb profiles to help you make better property decisions. We look forward to connecting with you again on the next Property Buyer Podcast.